That's my voice.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Yosha. My talk is BlackEnergy Power. It's going to be a story about a power grid hack and kind of going step by step. Anyone like stories? Okay. Most of you, if not all of you, so that's great. Before we start, just a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Israel. I used to serve in the Israeli army in the intelligence corps. I cannot tell you much more about it, or I have to kill you. But I moved here to the US 15 years ago and worked for multiple vendors, specifically in user behavior analytics and threat intelligence. I also worked in a SCADA networks, which is relevant for our story today. Just by a raise of a hand, which one of you is actively working in threat intelligence? Which one of you has threat intelligence teams within the organization? Okay, some of you. All right. So that's a good audience for me to kind of hopefully help you learn one or two about threat intelligence. So we'll start with the acronyms. Little quiz. What's IOC stands for? 1, 2, or 3, or 4? Indicators of compromise. We're going to run it fast. Kill chain. Which one is the second phase of the kill chain? Anyone? Weaponization. TTP stands for techniques, exactly. Techniques and procedures. Which one is not a threat intel feed? That's kind of hard, but Splunk, we'll speak about that. And last question, HMI stands for? Sorry? Number 2, correct. By the way, we have giveaways at the end. Those with the right answer will definitely get it, but so are the others, so you're welcome to get. Okay, so what we're going to do today is I'm going to tell you a story. Go over a little bit on those acronyms for those who are not familiar with them. I'll talk about a term called pyramid of pain and tools used to investigate threat attacks. And then we'll go over specifically the Ukraine power grid hack, step by step, how it was done, get into the technical details, and then talk about some conclusions, who might be behind this hack, and answer any questions you have. By the way, I'd love to do those talks interactively. If you have any questions during the talk, just raise your hand and ask or comment or whatever. So, indicators of compromise. Indicators of compromise, simply put, are artifacts within the network, either network or host, that being somehow suggesting that there's an intrusion. So, few examples of indicators of compromise. IP addresses, URLs, emails. All of those things can help us kind of put the puzzle together and understand the attack. Who is behind the attack and where are we within the kill chain? Now, indicators of compromise are not associated to any specific security attack model, but here you can see the kill chain model as an example. A kill chain model has multiple steps that attackers will go in order to successfully execute their hack. Each one of those indicators can be associated and collected either by computers or human being to the kill chain. So, for example, IP address could be related to command and control server. MD5 could be the hash value of the malware. Email address could be related to the delivery method, and so on and so forth. And so those help us to understand the kill chain. And I'll show you in my talk today a specific incident and how we can walk the kill chain using the indicators. Pyramid of pain. By the way, I heard it in some other talk. Someone was calling pyramid of pain. What is pyramid? Pyramid of pain is trying to aggregate all those indicators, okay, and put them into kind of buckets. The bottom are hash values, IP addresses. They are relatively simple indicators. You go higher the pyramid, you get into domains and infrastructure based, such as network and host. Those are more sophisticated. And at the top, you have tools like malware pieces and TTP, like I mentioned earlier, standing for tactic, techniques, and procedures, which is basically a behavioral indicators. Those are trying to identify the adversaries. Who are they? What are their motivations? What's the methodology? And what's the mode of operation? Now, the reason it's called pyramid of pain is because the higher you go on this pyramid, the harder it is to provide countermeasures. So, for example, hash values, it's relatively easy to block today using endpoints. You can create signatures for specific MD5. But it's also easy for the adversary to change a hash value of a malware just by adding a little bit of a code into it, right? Same thing with IP address. IP addresses are relatively easy to change for the attackers, but also relatively to block for the defender. If you go higher, it's harder. And you go into tools and TTPs, it's much harder for the attackers to change the actual malware they're using. But it's also very hard for us, the defenders, to identify those pieces. And that's why they call it the pyramid of pain. It's painful the more you get higher in the pyramid. So like in any other investigation, and by the way, I like to see cyber investigations just like any other crime investigation. Like a murder case. You have a detective, you have evidence, you have a suspect, and you're trying to find who murdered, where's the body, and who is the killer. And so the tools we're using, obviously, as you know, sandboxes for malware, network analyzer to identify lateral movements and communication back into C2, and any other observables such as password, keywords, DLLs, configuration file, registries keys, all of those helping kind of to put all those pieces together and solve the mystery. Now, if you don't have all the information, you can use what we call enrichment tools. What's enrichment tools? Enrichment tools are external repositories like VirusTotal and others that already have some history related to a piece of malware or an IP address, and you can add information and get more context around the evidence that you find on the scene. Log files. Log files from your environment can help you cross-correlate the information from the outside sources. And outside sources could be vendors, either commercial or open source, that send you indicators that are additional kind of information you can look at to those indicators you gathered by yourself. Make sense? Great. So let's look at the specific incident that we're going to investigate today. The incident happened in Ukraine. It was a power grid that the incident happened at December 23rd, 2015. You can see here a brief description, but three main points that I want to clarify is that this is the first time in history that someone brings down a power grid. First cyber attack that creates a power outage and gets power out of citizens. It's very coordinated. This specific operation was 3 different sites going down at the same time, simultaneously, in addition to a call center, a power grid call center that was attacked as well. And lastly, the impact, 225,000 people lost their power. So let's start going down the pyramid of pain. Remember? Starting from the top, tactics. What is the tactic? Obviously, in our case, is going after critical infrastructures. In our case, it's electricity. And bringing down the power. The question is why? And to answer that question, there's another pyramid. I like pyramids, by the way. It's called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Anyone familiar with that? Great. So a lot of people are familiar. So, as some of you know, this one tried to kind of match the motivation, what motivates people with their needs. And at the bottom of the pyramid, there are the critical basic needs of people, such as food, water, and electricity. And so obviously, the attackers were after a basic need. And I claim that it's not only the power, but also the security and safety of people that was compromised. Because when you're after a power and people don't really know what's going on, they're also insecure, and it's basically attacking their safety. In order to understand the techniques, how this was done, I need to talk a little bit about what we call ICS, which stands for Industrial Control Systems. Anyone familiar with that? Okay, great. Again, this one is a general term for control systems in the production industry and critical infrastructure industry that includes multiple pieces such as PLCs, which stand for Programmable Logic Controllers, and RTUs, which are Remote Telemetry Units, that are the glue between the equipment in production or in critical systems. In our case, it's going to be turbines, breakers, transformers. That's the hardware piece, and the computing network. And so in order to take off the power, it is critical for the hackers to understand how ICS networks work. Now, HMI, remember from our little quiz, stands for Human-Machine Interface. And this is how it looks like. Basically, there's an operator sitting in a power grid and has control on the turbines and the breakers. They can manually turn off some of them, turn on the others, and basically monitoring the process. Unfortunately, the protocols are very proprietary within this world, and multiple vendors have different protocols and different applications. So it's, from a security perspective, very hard to monitor and make sure there's no intrusion into those systems. In other terms, within this kind of world is SCADA. SCADA systems are the, again, general term for all those computers and networks behind this environment. And you can see here that there are multiple layers that the attackers had to go through. They're starting from an external network. Unfortunately, this one was not air-gapped, but there was a VPN that was supposed to protect the SCADA network, as well as Ethernet to serial communication line. And the attackers had to go through multiple layers before they ended up at the HMI stations, which has the capability to create this power outage. Okay, so going down the pyramid of pain, we're looking at tools now. And the main tool used within the Ukraine power grid attack is BlackEnergy. Anyone familiar with BlackEnergy? Yeah. So BlackEnergy is a relatively old malware family that has evolved even through the years. And the story of BlackEnergy starts in 2007. At that time, it was a very simple Trojan, specifically used for denial of services attack. Moving on, 2010, BlackEnergy version 2 was a much more sophisticated piece of malware, and at that point, it has capabilities for bank fraud and spamming. And then the piece we're going to investigate today is BlackEnergy 3. That's the one that has been used on the Ukraine power grid attack. That specific one has a modular architecture. It has plugins that he can load, and each plugin has a specific function within the kill chain, and we'll go into details there. Also, BlackEnergy 3 has multiple ways to be installed, including a dropper, just a simple DLL, or as part of an application, malicious installation. The second tool used in this attack is KillDisk. KillDisk, like the name suggests, is main purpose is to wipe out a hard drive. And the reason it has been used during this attack was twofold. First, to remove any evidence In other words, to kill the BlackEnergy piece and other evidences. Second, to render the SCADA network unusable. So the attacker's idea is that after we make the attack, we will make sure power cannot be restored from the SCADA network. From a host perspective, the attacker demonstrated variety of capabilities. There were two main methods for them to actually access the SCADA host. The first one is they managed to steal credentials, okay? And after they stole the credentials, they managed to create a VPN tunnel to the SCADA network. And at this point, they can recreate a remote desktop session, just like, you guys using a remote desktop RDP or TeamViewer. They can just see the HMI and operate, operate as a remote user. And the second one is, they crafted a customized malicious firmware and injected it within the SCADA network to one of the PLCs. So they would be able to execute what they want to execute and render the SCADA network unusable. Now, in parallel, you can see here on the top, the BlackEnergy piece kept on maintaining persistence and communicated back and forth into the command and control. So you see that there is, few redundancies on their communications that they kind of have more than one backdoor they could have used. So far, so good? Any questions? All right, so I need to start speaking slower. I'm not sure I have 50 minutes talk. Kidding. I will make it. So, now we're getting into those pieces of evidence, the small ones. Domains, IP addresses, those are the basic indicators. And just as an example, this is an IP address taken from the site. And there's a couple of things you can learn from an IP address. First of all, you can learn the geolocation. So we found out that this is in the west side of Ukraine. But then you can look at domain tools and find out what was the domain associated with that specific IP address at the time of the attack. And it turns out to be a list of domains, one of which was a gov.ua domain, which suggests that this specific attacker was after Ukraine government. GOV for government and UA for Ukraine. The other thing we can do with an IP address is to use a threat intelligence platforms and enrichment tools, like I mentioned earlier, like VirusTotal. And now we're starting to get a better understanding of what these IP addresses are associated with. For example, in our case, part of the kill chain is the command and control. You can see here kind of a circle of all the attributes. BlackEnergy, as expected, is the associated malware piece to that IP. You can find out what historically the ports has been used with that IP address, and other attributes and related indicators. This is a very interesting visual that we found on one of those variants. And that specific variant found within the site was modified to support proxy servers. The fact that someone modified the proxy server suggests that the attackers had some kind of a reconnaissance and some kind of an inside information on the fact that there is a proxy, and even found the exact proxy URL that needs to be used. Now, obviously, proxy is essential for this piece of malware to communicate back into command and control, right? So, again, going on the kill chain, we will see that this was a very thorough thought process from the attacker perspective. So here's just a list of what have been accomplished. Additionally to stealing credential, the attackers managed to create a VPN tunnel to access the HMI. They even disarmed the UPS system, so the internal computers won't have any backup once the power is out. And eventually created the final attack. So let's go over the kill chain step by step and see how the indicators help us solve the mystery. For those of you who are familiar with the kill chain process, this is a slight modification of the traditional kill chain. It's called the ICS Kill Chain. And it has actually two stages. The first stage has step by step what the traditional kill chain looks like. And the second one is the ICS attack itself. So because of this SCADA portion of it, there are additional steps necessary for the attackers before they can attack the SCADA network. And by the way, you can see here, it took 6 months from the very first intrusion to the actual power outage. So 6 months, the attacker managed to stay under the radar without being discovered, which is kind of scary, right? Think about it. All right, so let's go stage by stage, starting with stage number 1. The attacker decided to weaponize a Microsoft Office document with some attachment. You can see here, this is a decoy document. Obviously, it is in Ukraine. I kind of understood that this is some type of a political article. Don't speak Ukraine yet. But the idea is to add this one, and obviously the embedded malware within it will be a BlackEnergy dropper. So the delivery is going to be spearfishing. So emails are being sent into personnel within the power grid that use the same network. And those guys are opening it. And once they opening the attachment, they are going to be encouraged to enable a macro. Now, if they're enabling a macro, this is going to compromise and exploit a specific Microsoft vulnerability. You can see here the article of this vulnerability. And the way it works is that on that specific version, if it's not patched, it's going to allow remote embedded pieces to the PowerPoint. And you can see here on the bottom here that those pieces are coming in from an external source. Now, obviously, that piece of information is not an image. It's an executable, and it's the dropper for BlackEnergy. You can see here the INF file manages to change the extensions from GIF to GIF.exe. And at this point, the BlackEnergy installer has few challenges. The first one is, as you know, Windows 64-bit has a validation for digital signature process. So a driver cannot be installed without a valid signature. Unfortunately, they don't have the digital signature. So what they did is, the BlackEnergy is changing the boot configuration to allow temporary signatures. So at this point, it can install it. However, when you change this, there is this little text on next to the tray that says test mode. And in order to stay under the radar and make sure that this is not showing up, the specific malware piece we're using is running a patch for user 32DLL MUI, which is a user linguistic patch. And that allows them to change the text to whatever they want, and they choose to mask it out. So it's not visible. Now, the last challenge is that a UAC, user access control pop-up, will come up unless they're using some kind of an API. And they choose to use the Windows Application Compatibility API. It's a shim, that database that comes together with the dropper. And at this point, they're also masking this. So everything is on the background. And at this point, the driver has one kind of a task, which is to inject the DLL into a user space process, specifically svc host.exe. The driver doesn't have, by the way, any rootkits, bootkits. It's very lean, which makes it very hard to be detected. Even if you have rootkit scanners, you won't find it. And at this point, it looks for a disabled driver, available disabled driver, replace it with the malicious one, and start it. Add it into the registry, and Windows takes care of the rest. And at this point, the DLL is up and running. Okay, we're here. So, the DLL, the main DLL itself is useless for the attackers because it has, like I mentioned earlier, a modular architecture. It doesn't really have any functionalities. And so at this point, the main DLL can use a library of plugins. And each plugin has different type of capabilities. You can see here a few of them. Password stealers, screenshot takers, update malwares, the destroy system one, which is the KillDisk. And the upload is pretty simple. The DLL itself has 3 kind of API calls to call those specific plugins as necessary. And here at the top you can see the command and control servers that actually been used during the attack. You can see this, the full URL. By the way, anyone here can spot any threat or pattern between those names here? Yes? They are all from June. Good job. Actually, you're gonna get a shirt, not only a giveaway. Yes, that's true. Apparently, those hackers are fans of Dune. So let's look at the specific DLL used within the Ukraine power grid hack. The first one was stealing files. Very important function of any Trojan file or a Trojan malware. This specific one was looking for private keys, and think about the VPN access, that makes sense. They also tried to steal some password and get some system information. And very important portion of the attack was the DLL that's responsible for network discovery, because remember, as I mentioned earlier, at this point they need to start looking for the SCADA network and start exploring how they're going to execute the second stage. Also, PSEXEAC, who's familiar with those, is very powerful, was embedded with that DLL, which allowed remote executions. Okay, so basically, when they are establishing a foothold within the environment, they now are moving into stage 2. Stage 2, they're using the credentials in order to disable the UPS system. Just a nice kind of things they thought about. Make sure that after this operation, there's no UPS usable in the environment. The second thing, and that probably took most of the time, is developing the firmware that is very unique to those specific sites. And I can tell you that between the 3 sites that have been hacked, they had to develop at least 2 separate firmwares because the sites themselves have been using multiple vendors. And so that probably took time and probably involved them actually setting up a replication or a simulation of the same network they're attacking in their environment. Because like we do, we want to create a product, test it, and only then deliver it to the customer, right? That's what they did. Only that this specific customer probably was not happy the product worked as planned. So they're sending the firmware, and at this point they're ready for the attack. And the attack is going to be simultaneously 3 things going in the same time. First, they're using the TeamViewer in order to access remotely to the HMI and flip off the breaker. Now they're using the KillDisk in order to remove all evidence and render the SCADA unusable and basically wiping the entire hard drive. And then, in addition to that, they are launching a telephony denial of service, which is basically phone calls going into the power grid call center. So people that lost power won't be able to call and report it back, which obviously added more chaos and panic. And successfully they're doing it. And where is it from? June. So the reason it's from June and the group that eventually this whole kind of operation relates to is called Sandworm, which is this huge creature from Dune that was being treated as a god, and the history of the group is very interesting. And by the way, this is attributed to iSight, which actually there's a couple of security search companies that work on that, but that specific slide is coming in from iSight. And the history shows that that specific group historically is after governments and critical infrastructures, which kind of makes sense. But why Ukraine? And this is kind of my interpretation. Actually, my wife is from Russia, and I'm from Israel. But we know we know a little bit about politics and around Europe, and you probably heard about the Crimea kind of crisis. Russia is in the east trying to kind of pull Ukraine to her side, the West European to their side. And to me, this one might be related to this crisis between Russia and Ukraine. So this is a timeline of the actor, and a couple of things to mention here. So first of all, those guys are from Russia. They are the one who wrote or rewrote BlackEnergy, and they have managed historically to find multiple 0 days, specifically on Microsoft Office, not only PowerPoint, but also Microsoft Word. And they also, among their targets, and I think there are 100 targets, specific 100 targets that were investigated that are associated with this hacker. A lot of are from Poland, Ukraine, but also some in the US. So no, this is not from the power grid outage, but I guess what I'm trying to say on those photos is that it could have been much worse. All of those, the water facilities, transportation, gas, and even nuclear plants use very similar network structures to the one that was used during the Ukraine power grid hack. SCADA, like I mentioned earlier, is something that is implemented all over. And as someone who worked within the SCADA, I know that those are relatively legacy systems. They're using XP or sometimes even older Windows services and systems. They are not being patched because those guys are obsessed about touching their system. They want the production to keep on working. They want the power to be on. So they're really shy away from patching those things. And they're relatively unaware to the security, I would say, challenges, right? And to me, that's a red flag. What happened here is a power outage for a few hours. Could have been much worse. So let's talk a little bit about how we can solve that. So specifically, as I mentioned, the specific vulnerability found within or used within that specific attack can be patched. So this is a Microsoft security update that could have blocked that specific hole that was used during the attack. And you can see here that they also thank iSight for the investigation. And though today you cannot just go and execute remote OLE code or remote OLE files. However, that's not the only way someone can intrude into a system, right? There are other vectors. You can hide behind installers. You can use other exploits. And so just added another reference to June. Or you can read the subtitles if you cannot hear that. So the sleeper must awaken. So I really believe in that change. If you want to improve your security posture, if you want this not to happen, you have to change something, right? That's the definition of insanity, right? If you keep on doing the same thing and expect other results, that's not going to work. And so, we are big advocates in trying to help that from a threat intel perspective. Specifically, I came up with the list of, obviously, another pyramid. That's the last pyramid for today, I promise. And I was trying to look at it, from a kind of a network layer perspective, how we can make it better, and specifically talking about that incident and SCADA networks in general. And how we can add layers of security in parallel to maybe add some policies. So the first thing I want to say is that NERC has some policies that the energy, specifically power grids, needs to follow. And the US might be in a better position than that specific incident. And I think air gapping is a great solution for it. But NERC is kind of, it's a regulation. And I'm not sure it's followed 100%. I'm actually sure it's not followed 100% everywhere. Behind that, there's some kind of an awareness and kind of a self-understanding of what layers within your network are the weakest link. And so I kind of looked at it from different levels. Data and application level. One thing about HMI, it should be a very black kind of block or a set of applications that needs to be in an HMI. So application whitelisting might not work everywhere. I think on HMI, it should work because there's very certain specific of application you should know, should be there. Other applications shouldn't. So that's one thing. Enforcement of passwords is obviously always important, and as you saw, it was part of this kill chain, stealing passwords. Segregation of duties. This is very important. Make sure no operation or not HMI has full control on the power grid. You might want even to segregate the network itself and make sure that you can take off some of the networks if being infected without interfering with the other parts of the network. Look at the specific IOCs, indicators of compromise, from that specific event and other events, and implement patches that are relevant for those specific vulnerabilities. If you have a specific CVE that we publish or any other vendors publishing, use those. And obviously, use other indicators like IP addresses and MD5s to be used within your firewalls and your endpoints. From an architecture perspective, I believe air gap is something that should be considered when using those sensitive operation networks. If not, adding a DMZ and adding a higher level. Obviously, the VPN was not secure enough in that specific incident. So make sure you have extra layers of security over VPN. And again, I can tell you from experience that most of the vendors will ask you for a VPN to support the equipment. So, people like from Honeywell or from Yokogawa or any of the process automation providers wants to be able to support it, and the users wants to be able to get some support from their vendors. But as a network security guy, you want to make sure that there's few levels of multi-factors authentication and other security measures. Make sure you back up all the files. Remember what happened after the power outage. The entire files were basically removed. Make sure you have a backup so you can restore back your configurations. And as I mentioned, try to limit the access, obviously. The last part is more towards the human behavior, and I'm coming also from user behavior analytics, and that's most of the time is still the weakest link. Make sure that you train the operators, the users, kind of to understand what's to expect in the network, and also from an IR perspective, create workflows that not are only relevant for your corporate network, but also for your SCADA network. So one of them could be this disconnection of part of the SCADA, or moving fast from automatic to manual mode. And finally, as a security engineer or threat intelligence engineer, keep on investigating for new YARA rules and new snort rules that you can implement within your IDSs and your endpoints. So to summarize, we spoke about the pyramid of pain, and we said that the higher you go on the pyramid, the harder it is to provide countermeasures. We spoke about indicators in general and how those can help us identify the kill chain, and specifically in our case, the ICS kill chain. Like I always say, this is just one example in Ukraine. This can happen here. This can happen everywhere. And by the way, it can happen on any type of industry, right? Critical infrastructures is just an example. And so indicator investigation is part of a continuous process threat intelligence needs to have within each organization. And finally, make sure you implement those. The sleeper must awaken. So this is the resources I used during my research, and that brings me to the end of my talk. Thank you. We have time for questions. Any questions at all? Okay. Yes, please. Okay, so the question was, how do we approach serial network based into as opposed to IP based? That's a good question. So what happened today is there's a trend where you basically encapsulating those serial protocols, the legacy serial protocols, and starting to putting it over IP address. There are certain additional component of security that you need to do with those, because you cannot keep your network with the same security measures after you move from a serial based into an IP. When you add the IP, you also add potential additional vectors in order to attack the SCADA network. And so there are specific products in the market that are aiming specifically to security issues related to what they call a SCADA over IP. Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Everyone, just come here. There's a couple of